Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you all, whether you're watching me on YouTube or on Rumble. This stream is dedicated for you to pose your questions, and I will do my best to answer as many questions as I can during this stream. Before I start this stream and answering your questions, I will give you a few minutes as an opportunity to type your questions in the live chat. I already can see that there are multiple questions already, but to encourage others to type their questions, I would just say something. Today, I received a phone call. I'm not going to mention who is the person and what is his position. However, there are people who are concerned about my reporting of the potential Nusra attack. Nusra, the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria against the Syrian army positions. Of course, the people who are concerned aren't Syrians. They are Europeans. Some of them are journalists. Others are European officials. Now, they are concerned that if this front line and this conflict erupts once again, then many of these Al Qaeda types will flee to Turkey, and Turkey may blackmail Europe once again, like they did in 2015 and 16, and open the borders and allow the refugees to come again with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands to Europe. And among the refugees, some of these Al Qaeda types could also infiltrate and arrive in Europe. So they are very concerned about that. And I would like to mention something here that when I report about these cases, this should be seen as a warning, and this should be seen as a service to European countries, European people, and Syrians, and the Turkish people, and everyone in the region who, in my opinion, should share at least one common ground, and that is fighting against these Al Qaeda terrorists in Idlib. And this is not my words. The Pentagon and the DoD, they consider Idlib the largest Al Qaeda safe haven in the world since 9/11. Therefore, when these Al Qaeda types attack the Syrian army positions, they will, of course, be pushed back and they will be met with enormous military power by the Syrian army and the Russian Air Force. Therefore, some of these elements could flee to Turkey and from Turkey to Europe. So I think if we have to if we have to meet in the middle ground and say that Syrians and the European and the Turkish interests should be all be achieved, then I think that all these parties should cooperate together against these terrorists. There is no other way around. I don't think that keeping these tens of thousands of terrorists active in Idlib is good news for the Syrian people or the Turkish people or the European people or anyone with minimum humanity in this case. So those who are concerned about this, I truly believe that they should help Syria overcome this obstacle. And rest assured that some of these European governments, they have been active part in enabling this terrorist scene in Syria, unfortunately speaking. So I think it would be it was not in their interest, and now it's not also in their interest to support these terrorists. They have done it in the past, and I think they should fix it now and support it, and support the Italian government efforts to normalize ties with Damascus and jointly, let's say, combat this terroristic scene in Idlib and allow the Syrian government to capture these territories. Now, if I want to make a few points before moving on, some people ask, what is my source about this, etc. And I mean, most of these people do not follow the pages of the terrorists themselves. And this is a video published by, I'm not going to show the video because then YouTube will demonetize it. You can watch this video on my personal account on X. The CIA-backed terrorists from Saad bin Abi Waqqas brigade affiliated with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is after it was rebranded from Al-Nusra Fund to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, it's the same Al-Nusra Fund, the affiliate of Al-Qaeda in Syria. They have released a video showing them preparing for a major assault on Syrian Arab army positions. This offensive is clearly designed to divert Syrian forces, paving the way for Israel's potential expansion of the war into Syria. So, unfortunately speaking, guys, we have people still on social media platforms claim to be pro-Palestine. For example, Talha Ahmad. And he says, Assad regime sending military reinforcement to Idlib and Aleppo instead of Qunaytira and Golan. What strategic value does North carry in comparison to South Damascus, especially in the current regional security environment? So this is the same type of Israeli hasbara and a type of a lie after a lie after a lie for 14 years, and they have been proven to be wrong every single time. And also, to be honest with you, I don't really believe that in 2024 that these people are innocent. I truly believe that people who still type such posts on X and calling Syria and Assad regime and Assad forces and raising these type of points, they are, I believe that they either have bad intentions, so they're driven by ill intentions, or they're paid. There is no other way around in this. In 2024, if you don't see that Al-Nusra is a CIA paid contract army and they are working in the service of Israel, then there is something seriously wrong with your understanding of politics, or you are paid. And in this case, my answer would be the Syrian army sent reinforcement to Idlib because al-Jolani's al-Qaeda terror army, backed and trained by the CIA, has mobilized its forces on the front lines to wage an offensive on Aleppo and northern Hama. And this is the video that I added in the thread. And this was on the October 4th. I've been reporting on Al-Nusra mobilization before these armchair activists noticed it. And I reported it like 12 days ago, even before anyone noticed about this, because I received information from Syria. And I said the man in the photo is Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, the notorious leader of the Al-Nusra Front, Al-Qaeda's Syrian branch, since 2012. For over a decade, I have exposed the CIA's backing of this terrorist group. But in the coming days, al-Jolani will reveal his true role, the head of a US contracted army serving the interests of Israel. As I have already reported, al-Jolani is rallying his terror forces with direct support from the US to launch an assault on Syrian army positions in the north, Aleppo, Idlib, and Latakia. What's the real goal? The goal is to keep the Syrian army entangled in internal conflict, ready to neutralize them if an all-out war erupts between Israel, the US versus Iran. But this is an opportunity after years of pressure to delay the long-awaited operation in Idlib for the Syrian army to obliterate this terrorist force once and for all. So I've been reporting about this, and it's not something new, but it seems that my last video, which I published from one of the terrorist Telegram accounts on my X account, showing the preparation for a major assault against the Syrian army, it raised some alarms in some of the European capitals, especially in Greece. And my message is for them, I'm just a journalist reporting. I'm just a journalist warning of a possible escalation in the northern part of Syria. And I'm just a journalist here trying to give a service to Syrian people, to the Turkish people, and to the European people. I believe that this threat is mutual, like it threatens everyone. Syrians before the Turks and before the Europeans. So if they want this threat to be eradicated, they have to help the Syrian army in this case and stop this. In my opinion, the 14 years of propaganda against Syria, and which many of its aspects have been already fallen and proven to be completely false and fabricated. One of which is that if the refugees go back to Syria, then the Assad regime will detain them and hold them, kill them and hang them and do this and that. The other day I was reading the statistics, around 300,000 Syrian displaced refugees have returned to Syria from Lebanon after this escalation and the expansion of the war there. And of 300,000 people returned to Syria, around 13 people were detained on the borders, and this was reported by the Human Rights Watch. And of course, they made a big issue out of it, but nobody wants to ask why they were detained or stopped, because there is a difference between detained and stopped, right? I mean, some of them were detained because they were wanted for security reasons. For example, they have participated in the fighting in Syria, and if they were part of a terrorist group, they could be detained, and then they could join the reconciliation program, because the Syrian government has what is called the reconciliation program, and there is a presidential pardon for anyone who carried arms and fought against the government. If you cannot prove that this person has killed someone in Syria, you have to set him free. This is according to the Syrian law, right? So even this lie that if the refugees go back to Syria, then they will be detained, has already fallen. After this 300,000 Syrian refugees returned, and only 13 people were stopped on the borders for different reasons, some of which they are wanted, for example, for security reasons, or they have committed some crimes. I don't think that this is very controversial. Somebody is a criminal. Out of 300,000 people, 13 people were arrested. I mean, come on. So I will just drink a zip nip of water, and then I start answering your questions. The first question is very important. It's not discussed much. And by the way, while you're watching this live streaming, I would really appreciate it if you could just hit the like button, because if you hit the like button, more people will be invited and watch this live streaming. That would be really appreciative. Hi, Kevork. Can you talk a little bit about Turkey and Azerbaijan and help me understand how they fit into the conflict ongoing in the Middle East and how their role can change going forward? This is a very important question. I think that Turkey and Azerbaijan, they have slightly different politics in the region, but overall they are still revolve in a certain orbit, and that is the American orbit. Despite the Turkish Erdogan's, let's say, verbal clashes with the NATO side sometimes and with the European side sometimes as well. However, Turkey is still a NATO country. It's one of the most important NATO countries in the region, and it's a country whose territory is used by NATO to project its hegemony over the region, and especially in Central Asia, in the Southern Caucasus, and also in the Middle East. It's also important to note that Turkey still keeps its diplomatic ties with Israel. There is this Israeli ambassador and embassy in Ankara, despite everything that has happened after October 7. The same goes with Azerbaijan. Last week, the president of, I believe he was the president of Israel, was in Azerbaijan. And there is a very close relationship between Azerbaijan and Israel. For example, Israel sees Azerbaijan as an advanced satellite country to spy on Iran. And they have many Mossad operatives in Azerbaijan working to destabilize the domestic affairs in Iran itself. And in one of the leaked memos, diplomatic cables of the Israeli embassy, an Israeli Mossad operative says that he feels at home in Baku. Like there are not much of restrictions for him to work in Baku, and therefore he feels at home in Azerbaijan, and there are not much of a restriction for his mission, let's say, in Azerbaijan itself. Plus, we have Azeri gas, which is consistently, let's say, going through Turkey to Ceyhan port, and from Ceyhan to Israel. So 40% of Israel's energy needs and gas needs come from Azerbaijan. And therefore, the Israeli side sees Azerbaijan as an important economic partner and also a military partner. For example, many of the Azeri weapons after 2000, I believe, 16, 17, was from Israel. And Azerbaijan has bought billions of dollars worth of Israeli weapons and used these weapons against the Armenians of Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh. And these Israeli weapons were essential in the ethnic cleansing of the Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh. There is an article in Haaretz, you can search for it. It says the Israeli fingerprints is everywhere on the ethnic cleansing of the Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh. So this is the type of relationship between Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Israel. And up until this moment, the trade ties and the business ties have not stopped between the both sides, despite Erdogan's big mouth. He is directly and indirectly supports the Israeli economy, which is the Israeli economy at the end of the day is the most important thing to keep the military, let's say, equipped and intact. So I hope that I answered to your question. Our friend Johan says, Salam Kevork, what do you think is the best solution for ending the Russia-Ukraine war? And what are the concessions do you think both sides should make for a long-lasting peace in Europe? That's a very good question, actually. I have thought about it for a long time. What could be the best solution? I think the best solution before 2022 is different from the best solution after 2022. Before 2022, the possible solution was that Ukraine would give the Donbas region a political autonomy, and the Donbas region stays part of Ukraine, and the Donbas region would have more autonomous status compared to other regions. And Russia stops supporting the rebel groups and withdraws from these territories if they had any military presence there or intelligence presence there. The Crimea was an impossible for Ukraine to recapture even before 2022. Russia sees the Crimea as an existential post for them to have an access to the Black Sea and from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. So the Russians went to a very, I would say, big wars with the Brits before that, previously against the Ottomans, previously to keep the port for them and access for the Black Sea. Now, after 2022, unfortunately, this has become really a mission impossible. The Russians at the current moment see themselves victorious in Ukraine, and they don't find themselves obliged to give much of concessions, especially when it comes to the Donbas region. Now that they have organized referendums and captured these territories, they will not accept less than the Donbas region and Novorossiya for them. And this is a very unfortunate situation that could have been avoided before 2022 if a political settlement was reached or the peace agreement has been signed. Because remember, in February, March, April, the peace treaty between Ukraine and Russia was ready for signature. And the Brits, Boris Johnson and Biden, they have stopped this peace agreement. So the Russians feel they are betrayed multiple times and also feel like they are in a more powerful position than their enemies too. So it's not what I believe is the best solution. I'm a realist person and I see the balance of power there. And I see that in the near future, there is not going to be a major concession from the Russian side. And the Russians will not accept less than capturing the 4 new regions to their Russian Federation and keep the Crimea. The Ukrainians have paid the biggest price in this. Around 600,000 Ukrainian men have perished in the discourse of this conflict. This all could have been avoided. I'm very serious about this, and I'm not like trying to make any excuses to any other party. I truly believe that all these lives could have been spared, and I truly believe that Ukraine could have kept its territories in its hands. And those were all happened, and whatever came after 2022 was all based on miscalculations. And I would also go further and say that the Zelensky government is have bought into the illusion that the West will support him as long as it takes and as much as it takes, it was quite obvious that he should have made the calculations based on the status of the um, economies in Europe, the United States, and also should have made the calculation of how long this support could last and how much of a military support he could receive based on the military industrial capacity of the European and American countries, which he didn't do, unfortunately, because the propaganda was too big. And if you remember, in the first year of the war, European officials like Ursula von der Leyen, she used to say that the Russians are fighting with refrigerator and washing machine parts, or they were using the conductors from them because they no longer can produce and have conductors of semiconductors. These were all big lies that in 2024 it just shows us how much unfortunately the Western side can propagandize its own people, and also the people who are meant the most in this, like the Ukrainian people, because I believe the majority of the Ukrainian people believed that if NATO supports Ukraine and the European Union supports Ukraine, and the tanks and the howitzers and this and that, if they flow to Ukraine, then they will win this war. And unfortunately, the voices of reason were all sidelined. People were deplatformed, they were demonetized, they were demonized, they were arrested. Many, many things happened to people who warned of this scenario, right? It's a really, really horrible situation in Ukraine. I think if Trump comes to power, he will try to freeze this conflict on the current contact lines. But the main and the major problem in Eastern Europe, and especially in the contact line with Ukraine, is between NATO and Russia. This is not about Ukraine, right? Therefore, if we have to solve this situation, a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia is not enough. So there has to be a new security architecture agreed upon between Washington and Moscow. Anything less than that is just like we're not solving the root cause of the crisis. And what I mean by the new security architecture means that NATO has to respect the national security of Russia and not to expand to the east. And also Russia should respect the territorial integrity of the Eastern European countries. And this has to be signed on a paper and submitted to the UN Security Council. And this has to have guarantors such as China, Brazil, India, South Africa, and other reliable partners, because I don't believe that the Europeans are considered reliable to Moscow any longer. Our friend says, hey again, Kevork, do you think if Bashar al-Assad is alive, he means the brother of Bashar al-Assad, his name was Bashar al-Assad, things would be different? And do you think Israel is involved in the car crash, in your opinion? I'm asking because he was prodigy. For those who don't know, Hafiz al-Assad, the father of Bashar, he was preparing Bashar to succeed him when he passes away. And Bashar died in 1994 in a car accident in Syria. Now, I don't have an evidence for this. This is just my theory. I don't believe that Bashar al-Assad died in a car accident. And I hope that these words would not be would offend anyone in Syria, but I don't believe he died in a car accident. I believe that the Brits and the Israelis, they tried very hard with Hafiz al-Assad to convince him to sign a peace treaty or normalize relations with Israel. And I just want to make sure that I don't give you Madrid, Syria, Israel. I just want to make sure that I'm not making any mistake in the dates. So this was, I think this was in 1993, Madrid Accords. Syria and Israel had, this was in 1991, so the Madrid Accord, this was formerly known as the Middle East Peace Conference, and this was held in Madrid in November 1991. The conference was sponsored by the United States and the Soviet Union, and it brought together Israel, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and the Palestinians for bilateral and multilateral negotiations. So this was, let's say, indirect talks between Syria and Israel in 1991 in Madrid. And I believe that the Israelis and the Americans and the Brits realized that Hafez al-Assad is not going to normalize ties with Israel on the conditions of the Israeli side. Hafez al-Assad was very clear in his approach that Israel has to withdraw from every inch of the territories occupied in Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Egypt and the rest before striking any treaty or deal with the Israeli side. However, he also said that even if we accept to stop the hostilities toward Israel, that doesn't mean that we will open an embassy of Israel in Damascus, or we will, have a pushy relationship just like the Emiratis or the Jordanians have at the current moment. So he was at the same time preparing his son Basil, and Basil was very much similar to his father. He was a military man, and he was a strategist. He was a leader, and he had lots of the characteristics of his father. So for 40 years, the Americans were really tired with Hafez al-Assad and his firm geopolitical, let's say, policies in the region vis-a-vis the US and Israel. And at many files, Hafez al-Assad has strike blows to the Israeli and American interests in the region. So they didn't want for his son to come like Basil. If Basil comes, there will be another 40 years of the continuation of the similar policy. So if we put this into context, in 1991, and this talks failed again, and I think Bashar al-Assad's elimination in 1994 was not a coincidence. This came at the time when the Israelis were suspecting that Hafez al-Assad may have a few more years to live and then he will die. So they probably killed him. I'm just saying probably, them or the Brits in this case. They killed Hafez al-Assad to create a confusion in the Syrian political system. When Hafez al-Assad prepared his older son, Basil, and then all of a sudden he's dead. So Bashar had only a few years where he was studying medicine in London to come back and join the military and ascend in the ranks to reach to a certain point, etc., etc. He didn't have the same upbringing like Basil, I think if Bashar al-Assad has been assassinated, that's the reason why he was assassinated. That would have been, I think the situation in Syria would have been different. Syria would have been more of, let's say, I don't want to say closed country, but I don't think that under Basil, the economy would have been liberalized, or the internet and all this, the technologies that came to Syria after Bashar al-Assad came to power would have happened. He had a different mentality than his younger brother. So, Muhammad Hafijur Rahman, what will be United States' next move vis-a-vis the Mad Dog Israel? Syria, in that case, how dirty the role of Erdogan and Gulf countries will be. Isn't Syria the ultimate playground for the US to bring down Russia? Now, the Americans also know their limits, right? The Americans are not like suicidal, let's say, when it comes to Syria or to Russia. And they know that their forces in Syria are sitting ducks. They have only a few hundred soldiers in Syria, in the Al-Tanf border crossing and on the eastern shore of the Euphrates, whereas the Russians have military base, they have an air base, they have air force, they have air defense systems, they have artilleries, they have tanks, and the Syrian army is with over 200,000 active soldiers at the current moment. Therefore, the Americans can blackmail the Russians in Syria, but they cannot really overcome the influence and the leverage of Russia in Syria. And the next move of the US would be to restart this conflict in the north between Al-Nusra front and the Syrian army. That's the maximum they could do at the current moment. But if the Israelis invade Syria or they start carpet bombing Syria, of course, the Americans will give tangible support to the Israelis. Intelligence support first through their satellite images and in the alternative border crossing, because they have jamming technologies there and they have air defense systems as well. So I truly believe that the Americans can play an instrumental role in this, in helping the Israeli side to occupy territories in Syria if a conflict starts. However, as I mentioned in a few podcasts and few interviews already, the situation is not only, we cannot really measure the Israeli strength and might vis-a-vis Syria only through their air force and how much territory they can occupy for a few days or few weeks in Syria. We should measure this through how much pain and how much destruction Syria can inflict on Israel. Now, Syria doesn't have suicidal thoughts by starting an all-out war against Israel, because they, as you see, that Syria's territory is dismembered and there are still terrorists active, and they have American forces there, and you have sleeping cells in the country here and there. So they are wise enough not to provoke Israel and start an all-out war. However, if there is an existential threat against Syria, the missiles that you watched flying from Iran to Israel, Syria has similar ones developed in Syria and with tens of thousands of them. So I think that the Israelis also uh, should and would calculate this, because they don't want to live without electricity or their airports are destroyed, right? So we have to really measure this through the lens of how much Syria can inflict damage to Israel, and the Israelis cannot tolerate any longer more damages. We have to understand that the Israelis, many Israelis are dual citizens. They have two passports, and they have options always to in other countries. They have many of them came from the US or Poland or Russia or Ukraine or Germany, so they already have roots in other countries, or let's say places to stay or houses or anything, in other countries. Syrians do not have that privilege. Lebanese don't have that privilege. Palestinians do not have that privilege. Those are the indigenous people, and they have nowhere to go. And their passports, I mean, the Palestinians are not recognized as a state. The Lebanese and the Syrian passports are not accepted in most of the countries. You need a visa. And it's like an mission impossible to get a visa to go to outside, like let's say to Europe, for example. That's why many people come illegally, right? So I think in this case that it's quite clear who can sustain and more pain and more destruction. In this case, I think the Syrians and the people of the region would sustain more. Kevork, do you predict that we will witness the collapse of the Israeli state as it currently exists within our lifetime? Now, this is not a wishful thinking, because I'm an analyst and I don't do wishful thinking. Just a second. This light on my face, sometimes I sneeze because of it. So this is not a wishful thinking, but judging from the current situation, I don't think that Israel will recover from what they have done to the Palestinians, to the Lebanese, to the Syrians, to the people of the region. I don't think that after this maniacal, genocidal extermination of the Palestinians, they could recover in the eyes of the international public. And when I say international public, the people of the world, I'm not talking about the governments. And also don't think that Israel will be, its crimes would be forgotten anytime soon. And I don't think that they can normalize this any longer. Like what they did aimed at normalizing this type of atrocities, but the people pushed back against this. And I truly believe that any country that feels that it has to commit such crimes to exist then it will crumble from within. So I suspect, this is not a wishful thinking again, I suspect that when the war stops, or this maniacal genocidal extermination stops, there would be a big um, um, a big bubble will blow up inside the Israeli society, and there will be so many people who would realize that what happened after October 7. I mean, it was happening for a long time, but this is now televised. It's on our smartphones. There is going to be a chilling moment. There's going to be a painful moment for the Israelis, for the Jewish people around the world, to wake up to this bitter reality that in everywhere they go and everywhere they travel and everywhere they move around, that people will remember what happened. People have memory, and because the Israelis will not be able to eradicate the Palestinians, that's the impossible mission that they are aiming for, and they will not be able to occupy Lebanon and Syria. This is going to bring, in my opinion, the end of the political entity of Israel, this country that is built on a military base and a Zionist ideology. This is what is going to crumble. However, what is going to come next? That's the real question. I think we have a responsibility as people of the region, myself included, to spare any innocent lives and not to wage a revengeful actions, because an eye for an eye, everybody would go blind. I understand that many people would want to do that. This is just my opinion about it. People in Israel should be given a choice. They can live in Palestine under a rule of law, under a constitution that considers them equal to everyone. If they don't think that they are equal to the rest of the Palestinian people, that's their choice. And as I mentioned, many of these Israelis, they already have dual citizenship, they have 2 passports, so they have a choice. But if somebody is clever enough to stay and be just treated equally, that would be a great choice, in my opinion. Maybe I'm talking idealism, but when it comes to realism, I think that the political system based on this Zionism and the excessive military force to continue its existence, it's not sustainable. They will crumble from within sooner or later, and I think it's going to be in our lifetime for sure. Namaste, Cesar Keshishian. Kevork Jan, how much pain can the Israelis take before they leave, even by both or Jordan if they had to? I understand some airlines have stopped flights. I'm not an Israeli citizen. I don't know how much they can tolerate. However, I can only compare how much the Palestinians can tolerate. For example, the people in Gaza. I would just want to mention something that we, people watching what's happening in Gaza, we are horrified, right? Now, imagine that these Palestinians live, they live there in this under this horror. So imagine how much resilience they have developed naturally after decades of extermination and attempts to exterminate them and ethnically cleanse them compared to the Israelis. They have developed lots of resilience and resistance as a human nature compared to the Israelis. So on a long run, there is no way to compare the resilience of the Israelis with the resilience of the Palestinians. So if we are going to measure and judge the outcome of this conflict on the resilience, of course the Palestinians will be victorious over over the Israelis. Now, I think that many of the Israelis would decide to leave if there is an all-out war situation and they would no longer have electricity and services, internet, heating. If there is an all-out war and this infrastructure is destroyed, then I think that the Israelis cannot really survive. They're not. It's not in their characteristics after living years and decades in a very privileged situation in Israel to sustain and stay resilient during such tough times. This is just my personal opinion. If Iran can help Lebanon via Syria, why didn't Syria empower themselves in all these years? Brother, I don't know what you mean, but Syria has a very strong military, and Syria has faced over 120,000 multinational terrorists in Syria. I think that I don't know. Maybe you're from Iran, but I don't think that over 100,000 multinational terrorists is a small number of army. And they have invaded Syria through the border crossings with Turkey and Jordan. And Syria has the biggest number of tanks in the region, by the way. And they have tens of thousands. If Hezbollah has 250,000 missiles, Syria has more, for sure. So Syria, of course, is a strong army, but it has lived through a devastating war. If I want to make a comparison, Iran, and after 8 years of war with Iraq between 82 and 88, 6 years, in 89 and 1990, Iran was not in its strongest position, right? So that is normal. Syria has strong capabilities. What Syria lacks is air defenses. It has air defenses, but it doesn't have, I would say, the newest versions of the air defenses, some of which are related to Russia's hesitance to send these weapons to Syria. And the others are related to the destruction of these air defenses by the so-called rebels, who were supported and funded by the CIA, the Mossad, the MI6, and the rest of the regional intelligence communities to destroy these air defenses. I have watched countless of videos in 2012. So we're speaking of 2012, of these so-called rebels invading and destroying Syria's air defense systems in the air defense bases. And you wonder why? Because the Syrian army cannot use air defenses against the rebel groups or these terrorists, right? Because they don't have an air force. So why have they destroyed the air defenses? Who tasked them, and for whose interest was this were these operations? Of course, it was for the benefit of Israel, because air defenses, who is going to attack Syria except Israel from the neighboring countries through an air force? It's Israel, right? So they destroyed many of these air defenses in Damascus, in the suburbs of Damascus. So we have to really take these conditions into consideration first. Hi, Kevork. What do you think about the sociopathic psychopath Armenia's prime minister? Historical shame. You already described him perfectly. I think that Pashinyan is part of, he's just he's part of this international network of NGO linked leaders, people like Justin Trudeau, like Macron, like Annalena Baerbock, this type of politicians, mostly incompetent and mostly ideologically driven. And I think that Pashinyan came to power with direct support from the NED, National Endowment for Democracy, by the USAID, and by the Soros organizations. Those are all CIA soft power arms in the world. And they fund media organizations, newspapers, journalists, activists, NGOs. They groom the younger generation to accept their values, adopt it, spread it, and then to overthrow governments and elect a new government, someone like Nikol Pashinyan. However, after 2018, the experience shows quite clearly that this was disastrous for Armenia. It was meant to be disastrous from the beginning. Remember what happened when Saakashvili came to power after this color revolution in Georgia and what happened to Ukraine after a color revolution in the, the sphere of influence of Russia. Pashinyan, up until this moment, he survived, but on the expense of the Armenian national security, territorial integrity, and the loss of the most important Armenian territory, Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenia is now exposed to Azerbaijan, and my information indicates that Azerbaijan may attack again the southern part of Armenia, this time in the Sunni region, after this environmental conference called COP that they are hosting. I think it's going to happen this month or next month. After that, they're determined to invade Armenia proper. I have warned this for a long time, since 2018. I said Pashinyan will bring the end of the Armenian nationhood. And it's up to the Armenians now to fix this. In Armenia, I don't want to say more, but unfortunately, many Armenians that I speak to in Armenia, they don't feel this threat. They're just stuck in their daily lifestyle and which restaurant they're going to eat and which party they're going to go and what investment they're going to make. Unfortunately, there could be no longer an Armenia as a nation if the Armenians do not wake up and realize what happened in the country in the past 6 years. Love your work, Kevork. Thank you so much. Love your voice and heart, Kevork. Thank you so much, Sherry. I really appreciate it. Good morning. Hello, Kevork. Middle East strong. Radio Assad. This is someone from, I think he's Israeli. I don't know. He calls me Radio Assad. You're free to say whatever you want, brother. I am not even offended by it. American allies lose everyone. Middle East, Eastern Europe, South Asia, Taliban, and then Pacific Oceans from China. For China, rule Taiwan. Someone says, sir, I want to ask something. Ask. What's going on in Idlib? I think I already answered this question. The Jolani's terror army have mobilized their forces, and they've even published video footage of them preparing for an assault against the Syrian army positions. Therefore, the Syrian army sent reinforcement to the north. I think this is from the 25th unit of the Syrian armed forces. If I'm not mistaken, those are called the Tiger forces. So they have conducted joint military drills with the Russian side, and they are prepared for this scenario for a long time. So I think if the Jolani gang army attacks Syrian army positions, Syrian army will push back, and probably they could also see it as an opportunity to advance inside Idlib and finish this terroristic phenomena in Idlib. Hindustan lies. Assad regime alliance with Go Turks and Iranians against Kurds. Mossad alliance happening right for Israeli media said used. I don't even understand what is the question here, to be honest. Just type something, my friend, that I can understand. Tarzan says, hi Kevork, what is the relation of Al-Nusra and the rest of these funded proxies to the PKK and YPG? Are they all in collusion with similar intent to aid establishing Kurdistan? No. There is a big difference between the PKK, the YPG, and the Nusra elements. Actually, Al-Nusra and the PKK, YPG, they have great animosity among them. And Al-Nusra was supported by the CIA and Turkish intelligence, Qatari intelligence for a very long time. Now, the PKK and the YPG, they have been activated after 2017. Before that, they had a minimum presence in Syria because they were pushed back by ISIS and Nusra, and they were losing territory, and they were also acts of ethnic cleansing against the Kurdish people by these terrorist groups, right? But when Trump came to power and he ended the CIA covert operations in Syria called Timber Sycamore, all of a sudden all the front lines of ISIS, Nusra collapsed, right? Damascus, Aleppo, and they have moved all like in the Idlib governorate. Now, Trump didn't want to lose the eastern shore of the Euphrates, where the oil is, and also for the Greater Israel Project later. So they formed an army called the SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces. They are basically the YPG, but they renamed them, called the SDF, and added some democracy in it, Syrian Democratic Forces, to give the impression that this is some sort of a democratic force in Syria. Now, the Kurds and the Nusra elements, they are in great animosity, so they are not in good terms at all. So I don't see that Nusra and the rest of these terrorist groups are have the same goal of establishing a Kurdistan, because I believe that the project of Nusra, ISIS, and the other Islamist groups in Syria is to establish an Islamic caliphate in Syria. Now, ISIS is a different phenomena. ISIS had more like an expansionist vision. They wanted to expand to Turkey, to Jordan, to Saudi Arabia, etc. I mean, illusions after illusions, but still. Nusra is more like a local caliphate in Syria, right? So no, YPG, the Kurds, and these Nusra fronts are completely on the opposite sides. Yes, perhaps Kevork is getting paid by Assad. Bravo. You sound very clever. Question. When will you have Charlotte Denet on your show? I apologize for my ignorance. I have to Charlotte Denete? Denet? I apologize for being ignorant about this, because I don't know who is he. Charlotte Denet is an attorney, author, and investigative journalist. Am I correct about that? So, is a lawyer, author, and investigative journalist. She's based in Burlington, and where she was lived since she's 1984 with her husband. So she is the co-author of the Thai Will Be Done, The Conquest of the... I don't know who is she, to be honest with you. I just typed the name, and I will save it in the Google search now. Not Google, because I don't use Google search any longer. I have another browser called Brave. And yeah, so I will keep this in mind, okay, my friend, and I will check which type of conversation I can hold with this guest. So another Hasbara lie by Esrok says 500,000 dead and 5 million Syrian refugees, and Kevork is okay with that. So first of all, just let me debunk this Hasbara, which is an utter lie. The number 500,000 is correct. However, 1/3 of this casualty rate, so we're speaking of 130,000 deaths, is from the Syrian army, national defense forces, and the affiliated forces of the Syrian army. So 1/3 of this casualty rate is from the Syrian army forces. And 1/3 of this is according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, by the way, which is an opposition organization in London. He has a one-room apartment, and he has become an observatory for human rights from there, supported by the UK government, taxpayer money. So, according to the opposition, 1/3 of this number that you're just showing now on the internet, because you don't know anything about anything, is from the Syrian army forces, and 1/3 of them are from what they call the Free Syrian Army, Al-Nusra, ISIS, Ahrar al-Sham, Islam's army, and the rest of the terrorist groups. So we are speaking of around 300,000 of them are from the fighters. The rest, 200,000, they're not all civilians. They are considerable part of them are civilians, have perished during the acts of hostilities between the both sides. And there is no any evidence or documentation of who killed civilians, because this number of civilians, because I can tell you, for example, we were able to document, because he's now throwing numbers like this, if 100,000 civilians got killed during the discourse of this war in Syria, 13,000 of them were civilians in Aleppo, for example, who got killed by the mortars of the opposition. their names are all documented in the hospitals of Aleppo, and there is a list of names ready to read and check that these people died by mortar attacks and rocket attacks from the opposition side. So I think that if there is anything that we can describe this number is just an Israeli hasbara that people don't even know what are they talking about. Hi, Kevork, do you think that there are foreign-friendly forces in serious numbers in Syria ready to resist with the SAA if desires invade Syria? I think that the Hezbollah forces, they have majorly withdrawn from Syria. They, at some point between 2015 and 2017, during the peak of the conflict with ISIS and Nusra, I think the numbers were around 20,000 from Hezbollah. This was the peak. But the vast majority of them have withdrawn from Syria. Probably they have like 5,000 forces now in Syria as checkpoints because the Syrian army had to overstretch in different parts of the country. So, but there is no meaningful number, let's say, of foreign forces, let's say foreign friendly forces in Syria who would help Syria in its, if a conflict erupts or direct confrontation erupts with Israel. So what will be the red line for Russia in Syria? The red line would be, first, the occupation of these terrorist groups of major cities in Syria, because it will have a domino effect in Central Asia and the southern borders of Russia in Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan. You remember that these terrorist attackers in Russia were from Tajikistan. So they know that this could have a domino effect, and the Americans could copy this scenario, let's say, this example in the vulnerable parts of the Russian Federation. Two would be their naval base in the Mediterranean. And the third is the rule, what they call the so-called regime in Damascus. Those are red lines that Russia would not allow to be crossed. I already addressed this in the previous stream, but I would reiterate that those are the red lines of Russia. More questions. So, can you enlighten us if Turkey is actually aligned this moment with Assad? Are they helping Syria in any way forward, or just concerned about issues pertaining for the security of them? Okay. So, of course, Turkey is not partners with Syria. There is lots of mistrust between Syria and Turkey after 2011, and Turkey is opening the borders for these tens of thousands of multinational terrorists who, flow to the country and form these ISIS-Nusra terror armies. Syria doesn't really trust Ankara in this case, so they cannot be considered partners, to be honest with you. But Turkey wants to establish or reestablish ties with Damascus, diplomatic ties and security ties already exist, but they want to have, on the surface, over the table relationship. He wants to meet Assad. Syria has preconditions, and I don't consider them necessarily conditions because those are natural demands from Syria that Erdogan should commit and send a commitment to the Iraqi and the Russian mediators that he will withdraw his forces from Syria, and he will jointly accept to jointly combat terrorism in Idlib. And the other hand, Syria would try to push the Kurdish elements from the borders with Turkey 30 kilometers away, if the Turks see that as a national security threat. Other than that, there is not going to be any meaningful relationship between Syria and Turkey unless these conditions are met. Is not Russia already helping Syria? Yes, of course. Now, Russia is helping Syria in different ways. And Russia's presence in Syria as a guarantor for the existence of Syria itself, because the entire existence of Syria was in jeopardy. I consider what happened after 2011 an existential threat against Syria. So there was a serious possibility that Syria would perish, and disappear from the map if these terrorist groups occupied the country. So I think the Russian role was very detrimental and very crucial in this case. However, there is, this one step further that the Americans usually do with Israel that the Russians do not do with Syria, because the nature of the relationship between Syria and Russia is not similar to the relationship between Israel and the United States. I think that Israel is like an aircraft carrier for the United States, and some people call it a colony, some people call it a tool, a proxy, etc. Syria is not the same, like the relationship between Russia and the relationship between Israel and United States is not the same like Syria and Russia. Russia sent some recommendations and suggestions, for example, for political settlement, constitutional changes, or mediation with Turkey and Syria. But the last decision is in the hands of Damascus. And in Damascus, they are very wary and they are very cautious of giving any foreign power the opportunity to meddle in the internal affairs. They're very, very sovereignist in this case. Yeah, of course, Russia also gives different types of economic support, military support, agricultural support to Syria. But I always say, I'm Syrian at the end of the day. I also want for Russia to give more. That's why when I give this positive criticism, constructive criticism to Russia, because I want for Russia to have a better relationship with Syria and go this one step further in its relationship with Syria. So I'm reading. Kevork, will Russia give Syria S-400 to protect Russian weapons? Russia already has S-400 systems in Syria. They have it in their airbase and in Tartus. So they don't need to give Syria S-400 to protect their weapons. They already have these S-300s and S-400s to protect their own weapons in the Mediterranean. Exactly, like Esok says, hit the like button to support the Assads. Please do, guys. Listen to him. Oh my god, these people love something. Where can I find something about CIA and Nusra? I'm quite new to all this. For example, you can search for the WikiLeaks emails of Hillary Clinton and type, for example, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. And you would see the current National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, who was an employee for Hillary Clinton in 2012. He sent an email to Hillary Clinton telling her that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. You could also search for the joint military operation room called MOM in Turkey, which was responsible for supporting Al-Nusra's assaults and offensives in Idlib and in northern Latakia. You could also search for the former US Special Envoy to Syria. I forgot his name now, but if you type this like that, and then you could, so the former US Special Envoy to Syria, Jolani is an asset for US strategy. Jolani is the head of Al-Nusra. So there are multiple things you can search and see how the US supported Al-Nusra in this case. So, how realistic is it that Israel would try to access the middle section of Lebanon via Syria if they fail to make progress in the south? It's very unlikely. Very, very unlikely. I don't know how are they going to do that. You mean through the Golan Heights? I just want to check the map in front of me to see. I mean, the access that Israel has to Lebanon is through the Golan Heights is in Hasbeya. It's not in the mid of. So I just want for everyone to see what we are talking about. So this is the map. This is the map of Syria, right? So this is the occupied Golan Heights, this blue line. So they can invade Lebanon from the south to Bint Jbeil, for example, Maish, and from the, to Sur, for example, to Tyre. But if they want to attack, for example, to Marja'yun from this intersection, but if from the Golan Heights, they can attack to Hasbeya, right? But this is the mid of, let's say, the center of Lebanon. There is no way for them to attack on the center of Lebanon. They have to occupy to Damascus, and from Damascus they have to come to the center of the Lebanon, which is like mission impossible. Thank you, Kevork. Welcome, sir and ladies. So I'm checking for more questions. I still have a little bit more time. I don't know what this question is. Thank you, Julian Assange, for all your work. Yes, he was amazing in the Syrian case as well. Do you think US is playing both sides, Ukraine and Russia? No, I don't think so. So, what more questions? Greetings, everyone, from our friend Emir. And Basil was older, yes, than his younger brother Bashar. Is there a possibility that Iran directly attacks Zionist targets in Lebanon? No. Why would they attack Zionist targets in Lebanon? They would attack Zionist targets inside Israel, not in Lebanon. If they attack Lebanon, then it would be considered an aggression on Lebanon. And in Lebanon, they have like 50% of the political class. They are bought by the United States, and they would consider that an aggression on their sovereignty, but not the occupation of Israel. So I'm reading, why is Lebanon or Iran not able to target Israeli leadership the way Israel targets their leadership? Of course they can. I mean, they have the capability. The other day when Hezbollah attacked a meeting of Israeli soldiers while they were having a dinner, they have the intelligence and the military capabilities to strike Israel in such way. They have different approaches. We have to understand that such an attack, if it happens from the Lebanese or the Iranian side, it will not be treated by the US and the Europe and the rest of the rich countries the same way that Israel attacks and targets the leadership of Iran or the leadership of Palestine or the leadership of Lebanon. It's an upside down world, my friend. Like it's allowed for them, not allowed for their enemies, and there could be severe consequences that they don't see necessarily. That's a good place to start confronting their enemy in Israel. Good morning, Kevork. Will Armenia in the future know they made a mistake with USA and be friends with Russia because of getting massive military aid from Iran? Look, I'm for good relationship with everyone. As an Armenian nation, Armenia is sandwiched between Azerbaijan and Turkey, and it has Iran as an important power in the south, and also its sphere of influence for Russia. Therefore, I am for having good relationship with Iran, with Russia, and with the European Union and the United States, but not to become a pawn for anyone. What happened is unfortunate that Armenia has become a pawn for the NATO countries, which is completely different than having good relationship with them. Now, the Americans and the Europeans are using Armenia as a pawn against Russia, just like they tried to use Georgia as a pawn against Russia, just like they are using Ukraine as a pawn against Russia. And unfortunately, that this had and will have more severe consequences on the Armenians. We have to understand the limits of Armenian power, how much they can inflict damage to the Russian interests in the region, and how much Russia can, if they want to, damage Armenian interests. Armenia is not in a position to play with superpowers. You know what I mean? They need to have a security guarantor, for example, like Iran or Russia, because it's in the southern Caucasus. Like Armenia's location is not in northern America to say, okay, I'm going to become part of NATO. It's in a area where the Russians have strategic interests, where the Iranians have strategic interests. So when you bring in NATO advisors, observers, and you NATOize, let's say, your country, you will be seen as a foe in the region. That's the danger, and I don't see that the Armenians have woken up to that danger. And those who have woken up, they don't do anything about it. Basically, in Armenia, I go to Armenia a lot, and I don't see that the Armenians are really seriously concerned about this. I'm more concerned from here watching what's happening in Armenia. Is there any possibility that Iran directly attacks Zionist targets? I already answered this question on the minds of the majority of people. I just want to thank Amjad for becoming a YouTube member. You can also, guys, if you want to support this work, there are different means in the description below. One of which is you can become a YouTube member, and by becoming a YouTube member, you support this channel in different ways. For example, financially. So you're right, Kevork is the biggest crime of our lifetime. So I'm looking for other questions. Why is your YouTube comment section, not chat box, unavailable? The YouTube comment section only gets activated when I finish this live streaming. This is the technical issue with YouTube. It has nothing to do. Our friend Amir says Zionism will cease to exist by 2027. This is his prediction. Why did Palestinians and Arabs make coalition to attack Israel before any occupation and any settlements built? The Arabic armies made a coalition to attack Israel when there was a decision to partition Palestine. So we have to understand, this is an important thing, that Palestine already had Jewish people. They were minority. I think they were like 3% or 5% of the population. But before World War II, between World War I and World War II, the British and other colonial powers, they have exported Jewish refugees from all around Europe to Palestine, and they were received as refugees. But when the UN decided to partition Palestine and take almost 55% of the Palestinian territories and give it to the Jewish people, then this was the conflict when it started. The problem was not with the Jewish people, basically, because they were already Jews living in Palestine, right? And the Brits were occupying Palestine as a colonial power. And they have made these changes. They have brought the Jewish people, migrants from all around the world, and refugees, and they settled them in Palestine. And once they arrived, they have formed these militias, for example, the Haganas. You can read, my friend, in 1947 and 1948, 700,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed and forced away from their towns and their villages and their cities by the Zionist settlers. Yes, they didn't establish settlements because they had enough territories. They occupied the Palestinian houses and they lived inside their Palestinian houses, basically, in their towns and cities. But when more settlers came, they had to establish new settlements. So sometimes I find it little bit, to be honest, weird that in 2024 people don't see this still. The Arabs revolted against the UN partition plan because it wasn't their fault that the Nazi Germany massacred the Jewish people, basically. As simple as it is. If you're European and you were an anti-Semite in the 20s, 30s, and the 40s, and you were sending the Jewish people to the gas chambers, or you were persecuting them, or you wanted to expel them from your territories, that's not the fault of the Palestinians, by the way, to send them to Palestine and give them half their country or half their territories. It's your responsibility. This is a European problem, not a Middle Eastern problem. Somebody says sound go off. I don't know. Sound is working perfectly on my side, and I think on everybody's side except yours. So I'm looking for more questions. Kevork, if a one-state solution is implemented in Palestine, what are the chances of Israeli settlers staying there or leaving the land? I think that the majority of the settlers would leave. This is just my speculation. I might be wrong, because they don't accept to live under rule of law that treats everyone equally. They have this ideology that they're superior, and they want to have privileges, and they don't want to live as equal citizens. So I think that they would live with their own choice. So I am looking for more question marks in the chat. Hope that I have answered many of your questions. Does If you ask any question, please put a question mark so that I can see it. Because there are many comments. What is Armenia even know after the revolution? Who controls their country military? It's the Pashinyan people, the Soros people, the NGOs, this civil society. Collaborators basically with the NGOs, Soros, NED, USAID. What do you mean Hamas did what they did? This is a big question. So, my opinion on October 7 is that I might be wrong. Please don't judge me on this. That Israel knew about the attack and they let it happen. And this was their 9/11 moment to start this extermination process of the Palestinians in Gaza. They wanted this to happen to justify their extermination of the Palestinians. However, I also know from the investigations and the evidence that we have now in our hands that Hamas didn't rape. There was no systematic rape. There were no decapitated babies and there were no baked babies. Those are all atrocity propaganda to justify the Israeli extermination of the Palestinians. But I also believe that the Israelis were watching this planning by Hamas and they wanted it to happen in order to justify it. And that's why they implemented the Hannibal Directive, which they supposedly paused in 2017 or 18. They no longer implemented it, but then they imposed it again in 2023. And they killed many of the Israeli citizens during the discourse of chasing the Hamas, and also because the Hannibal Directive gives the authority to the Israeli army to kill even Israeli citizens if they are kidnapped and they are on the way to the Gaza Strip, for example. This is my opinion. How do average Syrians view Hamas? Is their popularity big in Syria? Oh, I think that this is just my subjective opinion. Many Syrians do not trust Hamas. After what they have done to Syria in 2012, they have left Syria. Syria was asked by the United States to close the offices of Hamas and Hezbollah in 2003 many times, and Syria lived under harsh sanctions and enormous political pressure and threats of invasion because of their support to Hamas and Jihad and Hezbollah and opening their offices in Damascus, right? And giving them leverage, logistical support, military support, etc. Now, when Hamas decided to side with Qatar and Turkey against Damascus in 2012 during this regime change war, Hamas lost lots of credibility in Syria. And then Hamas started doing another U-turn in 2017 and 18, and they said we are going to reconcile with Syria. Yes, Syria opened its doors again, but they don't really trust Hamas, I believe, in Damascus. However, they say, strategically speaking, we are with the resistance against the occupation, this and that, but I don't think that Syria gives them direct support any longer, like they used to do previously. Does Syria have a system to avoid a puppet for taking over the Syrian presidency after President Bashar's lifetime? I don't know. Just to say, I don't know. There is probably a thinking, probably they already thought about this, what could happen after Bashar in Syria. And this is a question should be directed to them. I don't have any information to reveal, like if I had, I would have answered to you. I have to be humble and say, I don't know. Do you think if Trump gets elected, he might betray Israel's huge support for him? No. No, guys. No. This is the talking point of many people who want to vote for Trump. Look, I don't want to come and say for you, don't vote to Trump or don't vote for Kamala Harris. I truly believe that whoever you vote in the United States, this extermination war will continue in Gaza. Because this is not about an administration, it's not about a president, it's not about a foreign minister. This is about a deep state in the United States. And whoever comes and goes, there are certain headlines that is not going to change, and one of which is Israel. And Trump could be even worse. So, can you recommend a good book on Syrian war? Let me check if this book is already published by William. So, we have, I'm going to, okay, so please, I will put a link now, or I will screen you a website on the Libertarian Institute, or go yourself, my friend. Okay, this is it. So I just put a link now in the live chat, and I will screen it for you to see. This is the website of the Libertarian Institute, and those are the articles published by William Van Wagenen. He's my friend from the United States, and you can go to the books. So in the books, there is going to be a new book published soon, okay, in the Libertarian Institute called The Origins of the Dirty War on Syria. And I myself, I have written a book review and also a foreword for this book. It's going to come soon, and once it comes, I'm going to host William Van Wagenen in few episodes, and we will discuss every chapter of it together, and I will promote to you the book, and you can buy it. How about that? Great, huh? One of our friends says, I am the son of a Syrian from Halab. He means Aleppo, living in Detroit, Michigan. I have appreciated your work for years, but especially in this last very hard year. Keep up your fantastic work. Your words means a lot to me, my friend. And there are many, let's say, people from Syria appreciate what I do. There are people who don't like, unfortunately, when you work as in a political field, as a podcaster, as someone who is spreading or giving his opinion, it could be controversial. Some people would like you, some people don't. But when you are in a certain camp, let's say, and you say these words, I would really appreciate it. And thank you so much for your generous support. Question: is there any Nusra in any other Middle Eastern country, or only in Syria, my friend? Is he changing direction now because he is afraid of being assassinated? Do you mean Assad? No. Assad was not afraid even when ISIS was 5 kilometers away from his office. So, do you think this is the right moment to move the Syrian army to Idlib? Is that Turkish plan to divide the Syrian forces for the benefit of Israel? The Syrian army doesn't send all its army, but it has sent some of its elite forces, the Unit 25th, to Idlib to combat this terroristic threat coming from Idlib at the current moment. Turkey says, according to information that I received, in Syria, or they claim that they're not agreeing to this offensive of Nusra in Syria. But if Turkey wants to stop this offensive, they could, because they have a huge leverage over Nusra. All their weapons, equipment, training, everything came from Turkey, right? I want to thank our friends here. Also, I want to thank Plex for becoming a member. Why did Bush Jr., when all the planes were stopped, when stopped 9/11, allow planes to pick up Osama bin Laden's family here? I didn't understand the question, unfortunately. So I think those were mostly the questions. Thank you, Kevork, for your wisdom. Thank you so much for your kind words. How Israel is not America's greater friend. Israel is a tool or a proxy for the United States in the region. It helps the United States, of course. It's helps them in intelligence, in military. It attacks the countries that counter U.S. hegemony in the region. Thanks, Kevork, for the detailed reply. With pleasure, my friend. Do you follow the work of Whitney Webb? Yes. I think she's brilliant journalist as is Vanessa and Eva Bartlett. I also hosted her on this YouTube channel. If you want, you can search in Syriana Analysis. I hosted her, I think, a year ago. I should host her again. She's amazing and she's very kind and very humble and amazing journalist. I don't know how she can memorize all this information. Sometimes I follow her on TV and I need to write notes. So I think this is all. Garland Nixon. Yes, I considered him. He hosted me once on his show. I should have him back on my show, actually. So I think those. Oh my God, there's so many other. But I already have 1.5 hours for this live streaming. I just wanna give shout out to every single one of you guys for tuning into this live streaming. I really appreciate you all for watching and posing your questions. There were so many of them. If you think that this content was valuable to you and you liked it, please hit the like button before leaving this live streaming and share this video with your friends. And if you like to support the independent work I'm doing, you can become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. And I will see you tomorrow on Thursday, 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. Peace be upon you, upon your families. Salam.